Hi everyone! Let's talk about something important. We have covered a lot of ground in this series. In part 1, we named the enemy within, the conditioned, inherited version of yourself that quietly sabotages everything you are trying to build. In part 2, we explored what it means to be the dreamer of your reality, and how your inner state is being projected outward into every financial circumstance and every experience you have. And now we arrive at the final piece. The one that ties everything together. The one that honestly, I think is the most practically transformative concept in the entire book. Because here is the question that both of those previous conversations were building toward. If the enemy within has been running the show, and if you are the dreamer of your reality, then what is the actual work? What do you change, and how do you change it in a way that produces real, lasting, visible results in your financial life and beyond? The School of Gods has a very specific answer to that question, and it is not what most people expect. It is not about doing more. It is not about a better strategy, a more disciplined routine, or a more optimized approach to the external work of building the life you want. It is about who you are being while you do any of it. If you have not watched parts 1 and 2 yet, they are on the end screen. Go watch those first. This series is best experienced in order. And if you are ready to close the loop, let's go. Hey, glad you're here. Let me paint a picture that I think is going to feel very familiar. You have a financial goal. Maybe it is a specific income level you have been working toward. Maybe it is the freedom to work on your own terms, build your own wealth, stop trading your time for someone else's definition of what you are worth. Maybe it is simply the feeling of genuine, settled, unshakable financial security, the kind that does not depend on a paycheck or a corporate structure, or any external system to feel real. And so you do what every motivated, intelligent, growth-oriented person does. You work toward it. You strategize. You optimize. You apply more discipline, more consistency, more effort. You read the books, take the courses, implement the systems. You do more. And when that does not produce the results you expected, you conclude that the answer must be to do even more. This is the framework that most of us were handed before we were old enough to question it. And it is so deeply embedded in how we think about achievement, especially financial achievement, that most people never stop to examine whether it is actually true. Work harder and you will get further. Do more and you will have more. The path from where you are to where you want to be is paved with better strategies and more disciplined execution. I lived inside this framework for years. Inside the financial and insurance world, it was not just an assumption. It was the entire culture. The people who succeeded were the ones who outworked everyone else, who stayed later, pushed harder, optimized more relentlessly. And there was a certain kind of results that framework produced. Real results, measurable ones. But there was also a ceiling. And it was not a ceiling made of external circumstances or market conditions or lack of opportunity. It was a ceiling made of doing. Of the fundamental limitation of a framework that believed results were primarily a function of action, and that the answer to hitting a ceiling was always to push harder against it. I remember the exhaustion of that period with a clarity that still surprises me. Not the physical exhaustion of long hours, though that was real, but a deeper exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who is running as fast as they can in a direction that feels increasingly disconnected from where they actually want to go. Who is doing everything the framework demands and still sensing, with a quiet but persistent certainty, that something essential is missing. D'Anna describes this experience in the School of Gods with a precision that I found almost uncomfortably accurate. He talks about how the world of doing, the world most of us inhabit almost exclusively, is built on a fundamental inversion of the true relationship between inner state and outer results. It assumes that results are produced by actions, and that better results require better actions. More optimized doing. But what D'Anna points to and what I have come to understand through my own experience and through watching the financial lives of clients transform when they finally grasp this, is that the relationship actually runs in the opposite direction. Actions do not produce results independently of the state of being from which they are taken. The same action, taken from two completely different inner states, produces completely different outcomes. Not slightly different fundamentally, sometimes dramatically different, because the action is not the primary variable. The being is. Think about what this means in financial terms. Two people make the same investment. They have access to the same information, the same market conditions, the same external variables. One approaches it from a state of genuine confidence, a deep, settled, internally grounded knowing of their own financial judgment and their own right to abundance. The other approaches it from a state of anxious hoping, a doing framework desperation that this particular action will finally produce the result that all the previous actions have not. The outcomes are rarely the same, not because the universe is rewarding one person and punishing the other, but because the quality of being from which the action is taken shapes everything about how that action is executed, the decisions made within it, the responses to what unfolds, the follow-through, the capacity to hold steady when circumstances become uncertain. The doing is identical. The being is completely different, and the being is what actually determines the result. This is not a spiritual bypass of real financial work. I want to be absolutely clear about that, because I think it is the most common misunderstanding of this teaching. D'Anna is not saying that action does not matter. He is not saying that action does not matter. He is not saying that strategy and discipline and the practical work of building financial freedom are irrelevant. He is saying that they are incomplete without the foundation of being from which they are taken. That doing without being is like building a house without a foundation. You can construct something impressive looking, but it will not hold. It will keep requiring more effort to maintain than it should. It will keep developing cracks that no amount of renovation work will permanently fix. And the moment you begin to address the being, the moment you start shifting the quality of inner state from which all your doing is taken, the doing itself becomes more effective, more aligned, more naturally productive, not because you are doing more of it, but because you are doing it from a completely different place. That place, that quality of being, is what we are going to explore next. Because understanding what D'Anna means by being is the key that unlocks everything else in this final part of our series. So now we have named the limitation of the doing framework. The exhaustion of someone who is working as hard as they can within a system that treats action as the primary variable and keeps hitting a ceiling that more action alone will never break through. And now I want to get precise about what D'Anna actually means when he talks about being, because this is the word that gets used most loosely in the personal development space, and most loosely is also most useless. People talk about being as if it means relaxing more, or meditating, or simply feeling good. And while those things are not irrelevant, they are not what D'Anna is pointing to. Being, in the framework of the School of Gods, is something far more specific and far more powerful than that. It is the quality of consciousness you are operating from, the fundamental inner state, beneath the thoughts, beneath the strategies, beneath the doing, from which everything you create in the world originates. It is not what you think about yourself. It is what you are at the level that exists before thought, the baseline frequency of your consciousness. The inner climate that persists through every circumstance, every challenge, every financial decision, every moment of uncertainty or opportunity. And here is what makes this concept so important and so different from anything the conventional doing framework offers. Being is not something you achieve. It is not a destination you reach after enough effort or enough growth or enough spiritual practice. It is something you inhabit, something you cultivate. Something you choose, moment by moment, decision by decision, in the ordinary, unglamorous texture of your daily life. D'Anna describes the person of high being in the School of Gods with a set of qualities that I find both deeply inspiring and immediately recognizable in the people I have encountered who seem to create results almost effortlessly. And I want to walk through a few of those qualities, not as an abstract ideal, but as something genuinely practical and immediately applicable. The first quality is presence, not the performance of presence, not the conscious effort to seem calm and grounded in high-stakes situations, but genuine, deep, unshakable presence. The capacity to be fully here, fully engaged, fully available to what is actually happening, without the noise of anxiety about the future or regret about the past pulling you out of the moment where all creative power actually lies. In financial terms, I have seen this quality produce extraordinary results. The investor who can sit with uncertainty without being destabilized by it. The entrepreneur who can face a challenging quarter without the fear response hijacking their judgment. The consultant who can walk into a difficult client conversation fully present, not managing their own anxiety, not rehearsing their talking points, not calculating outcomes, just genuinely, completely there. That presence is not a personality trait. It is a quality of being. And it produces results that no amount of preparation or strategy can replicate. The second quality is what D'Anna calls internal independence, the capacity to operate from an inner reference point rather than an external one. to make decisions, take actions, and move through the world from a place of genuine internal authority rather than constantly scanning the external environment for validation, permission, or confirmation that you are on the right track. This one landed very personally for me because so much of my doing framework during my years in the corporate world was driven by external reference points, by what the metrics said, what the hierarchy approved, what the system rewarded. And while those things provided a certain kind of structure, they also created a profound dependency. My sense of financial confidence, my sense of my own value, my sense of whether I was succeeding, all of it was outsourced to external validation. And that outsourcing was expensive, not just energetically, though the cost of constantly seeking external confirmation is enormous, but financially. Because someone whose sense of worth depends on external validation will always, subtly but consistently, limit themselves to what the external world is currently willing to confirm. Internal independence, the quality of being that operates from genuine inner authority, produces a completely different financial reality. Not because it ignores external feedback or lives in a bubble of self-delusion, but because it relates to external feedback as information rather than verdict, as data to be considered rather than judgment to be obeyed. The third quality, and the one I think is most directly relevant to the financial life, is what I would describe as settled certainty. Not the performed confidence of someone who is trying to appear unafraid, but the deep, quiet, almost unremarkable certainty of someone who has done the inner work of genuinely knowing their own value, their own capacity, and their own right to the abundance they are building toward. I have encountered this quality in a handful of people across my years in the financial world, and every single one of them had a relationship with financial success that seemed almost frictionless compared to everyone else operating at the same level of external competence. Not because they were luckier, not because they had better strategies, but because the quality of being from which they operated attracted, generated, and sustained results that the doing framework alone could never have produced. That quality of being is not reserved for a special few. It is not a gift that some people are born with and others are not. It is cultivable. It is, as D'Anna insists throughout the School of Gods, the real work of human transformation. And in our next block, we are going to look at exactly how that quality of being translates into specific, tangible, measurable financial results. Because I think the most important thing to establish before we talk about how to cultivate being is that it is not a luxury or a spiritual add-on to the real work of financial freedom. It is the foundation that the real work is built on. So now we understand what being actually is. Not a passive state, not the absence of action, not a spiritual bypass of the real, practical work of building financial freedom, but the quality of consciousness, the inner climate, the baseline frequency from which all action is taken, and the specific qualities that characterize high being, presence, internal independence, and settled certainty. Now I want to get completely practical, because I think the most important thing I can do in this final part of our series is demonstrate, clearly, honestly, and scratch with real examples, exactly how the quality of being translates into financial results. How it shows up not as an abstract spiritual concept, but as something measurable, something tangible, something you can actually observe operating in your own financial life once you know what to look for. Let me start with something that I think most people in the financial world have experienced, and just about co-history, the manic just chan, and rarely examined closely. Have you ever noticed that certain people seem to attract financial opportunity almost effortlessly, while others, working just as hard and with just as much external competence, seem to have to fight for every result? That some people walk into a room and something shifts, clients lean in, deals move forward, opportunities materialize, while others can execute perfectly on paper and still feel like they are pushing against an invisible resistance. The doing framework has no satisfying explanation for this. It attributes it to luck, or to network, or to timing, or to some vague quality of charisma that certain people have and others do not. But D'Anna offers a much more precise and much more useful explanation. It is being. It is the quality of inner state that one person is radiating and the other is not. And it is not charisma in the performative sense. It is not about being louder or more charming or more aggressively confident. It is about the depth and quality of the inner state from which someone is operating. The degree to which they are genuinely, internally, at the level of settled conviction aligned with the financial reality they are building. I want to share two contrasting examples from my own experience, because I think the difference becomes most clear when you see it illustrated concretely. Early in my career in the financial world, I worked with a colleague who was, by every external measure, as competent as anyone in our field. Technically sharp, well-prepared, genuinely knowledgeable. But there was something in how he operated that I could never quite name at the time. A quality of anxious striving that was almost imperceptible on the surface, but that somehow communicated itself in every client interaction, every negotiation, every financial decision he made. He was doing everything right, but he was doing it from a place of needing the result, of his financial confidence, his sense of professional worth, his internal stability, all of it depending on the outcome of each transaction, and clients felt it. Not consciously. But something in how they responded to him, a subtle hesitation, a tendency to question his recommendations more than the situation warranted, a resistance that had nothing to do with the quality of his advice, reflected back the inner state he was projecting. Contrast that with someone I encountered later, a woman who had built remarkable financial success in a field far more competitive than ours. She was not louder. She was not more aggressive. She was not working longer hours or applying more sophisticated strategies than anyone else in her space. But there was a quality to how she moved through the financial world that was genuinely different. A settledness. A complete absence of the needing energy that characterized so many of her peers. She operated from a place of such genuine internal sufficiency that the opportunities, the clients, the financial results, they seemed to organize themselves around her almost naturally. She was not doing more, she was being differently, and the financial results were incomparable. I have seen this dynamic play out in my own life with a clarity that still humbles me. During the period when I was transitioning out of the corporate world, when the doing framework was still dominant and my financial confidence was still externally referenced, every client interaction, every consulting opportunity, every financial decision carried the weight of needing to work out. And that needing energy was expensive. It created friction where there should have been flow. It generated resistance where there should have been ease. As the quality of my being shifted, as I began to genuinely inhabit the inner state of someone whose financial security was internally generated rather than externally dependent, something changed in how the financial world responded to me. Not because I was doing anything differently on the surface, but because the being from which I was doing had fundamentally shifted. Clients who would have hesitated began to trust immediately. Opportunities that would have required enormous effort to generate began to present themselves naturally. Financial results that had previously required maximum doing began to emerge from a place of what felt, by comparison, like almost effortless alignment. This is not magic. This is not manifestation as wishful thinking. This is the precise, consistent, completely reliable operation of being as the foundation of doing. When the inner state is genuinely aligned, when the quality of consciousness from which you are operating is one of settled certainty, internal independence, and genuine presence, the doing becomes more effective, more naturally productive, and more sustainably successful than it could ever be from a foundation of anxious striving. And here is the financial principle that underlies all of this, one that I think captures it more precisely than anything else I have found. In the world of investment, we talk about the concept of return on energy, not just return on capital, but the quality of result generated per unit of energy invested. And the person of high being generates a return on energy that is simply incomparable to the person operating purely from the doing framework. Not because they are working less, but because they are working from a foundation that multiplies the effectiveness of everything they do. That multiplication, that compounding return on the investment of cultivating genuine being, is what we are going to bring home in our final block, and with it, the complete framework that this entire series has been building toward. Here we are, the final block of the final video of this series. And I want to take a moment before we go into anything practical to acknowledge what we have covered together across these 3 conversations. In part 1, we named the enemy within, the conditioned, inherited version of yourself that operates in the shadows of your consciousness, quietly capping your financial potential and keeping you safely inside a life that was never truly yours to begin with. In part 2, we discovered that you are the dreamer of your reality, that the financial circumstances, the patterns, the ceiling that keeps following you are not happening to you, but being generated by you, and that changing the dream requires changing the dreamer. And now, in this final piece, we have explored the concept that ties it all together, that the transformation you have been seeking, the financial freedom, the abundance, the aligned life, has never been primarily about what you do. It has always fundamentally been about what you are. So how do you actually begin to shift from doing to being? How do you take everything we have explored across this series and turn it into something real, daily, and immediately applicable? D'Anna is very clear about where this begins, and it begins with a decision, not a strategy, not a technique, not a practice you add to your morning routine and forget about by noon. A genuine, deep, fully committed decision to make the quality of your being the primary investment of your life. Not instead of the doing, but as the foundation from which all the doing becomes exponentially more effective. In practical terms, this means beginning to ask a different question before every significant action, every financial decision, every moment where you are about to engage with the work of building the life you want. Instead of asking, "What do I need to do here?" you ask, "Who do I need to be here?" Not as a performance, not as a mask you put on to appear more confident or more capable than you feel, but as a genuine, honest inquiry into the quality of inner state you are bringing to this moment. And then, as best you can, with whatever awareness you currently have, choosing to bring the highest quality of being available to you. This sounds simple, and in one sense it is, but I want to be honest about what makes it difficult, because I think that honesty is more useful than making it sound easier than it is. The doing framework is deeply comfortable. It is familiar. It gives you something concrete to measure, something clear to optimize, something external to point to as evidence that you are working hard enough and doing enough to deserve the results you want. Shifting to a being-centered approach requires giving up some of that comfort. Requires tolerating the ambiguity of working on something internal and invisible rather than external and measurable. Requires trusting a process whose results are real but whose timeline is not always predictable. I remember the discomfort of this shift in my own financial life. The moments where the being-centered approach felt too slow, too internal, too disconnected from the urgent practical realities of building financial freedom in the actual world. Where the pull back to the familiar doing framework, just work harder, just optimize more, just do more, was almost overwhelming. And what kept me on course was not willpower or discipline. It was evidence. The accumulating, undeniable, deeply personal evidence that the quality of my being was producing results that the doing framework alone never had. That the clients, the opportunities, the financial outcomes that were showing up as my inner state shifted were not coincidences. They were the natural, consistent, completely reliable return on the investment of cultivating genuine being. So here is the practical invitation I want to leave you with, not just from this final video, but from this entire series. Start with the enemy within. Begin the practice of observing it, catching it in the act, naming it honestly, recognizing it as the conditioned self rather than your truth. Not to fight it, but to see it clearly enough that it begins to lose its grip. Then shift to the dreamer. Begin to relate to your financial reality not as something happening to you, but as something being generated by you. And ask, with genuine curiosity, what inner state the dreamer has been operating from and what inner state you would consciously choose instead. And then, as the foundation of all of it, invest in your being. Make the quality of your consciousness the primary asset you are developing, not instead of the practical financial work, but as the ground from which that work becomes exponentially more effective, more naturally productive, and more sustainably aligned with the life you are genuinely here to live. Because here is what I know, from everything I have learned through this journey, from D'Anna's extraordinary book, from my own transition out of the doing framework and into something that feels, by comparison, like coming home. The financial freedom you have been building toward is not waiting for you to do more. It is waiting for you to be more. To be the version of yourself that is already, naturally, completely aligned with the abundance, the freedom, and the life that you have always known was possible. That version of you is not far away. It is not a future achievement. It is the you that exists right now, beneath all the conditioning, beneath all the doing, beneath all the inherited limitations and borrowed beliefs about what is possible for someone like you. It is who you have always been, and it is who you are becoming, one conscious choice of being overdoing at a time. Thank you for being here for all 3 parts of this series. It has been one of the most meaningful conversations I have had on this channel. If you have not watched parts 1 and 2 yet, they are on the end screen. Go watch them in order, because each one builds on the last. And if this series brought you something real, share it. You never know whose life you might change with a single video. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this video and until the end of this series. It truly means the world to me, and I hope these conversations brought you something real, something you can carry with you starting today. If this resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel. We have so much more to explore together. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. You never know whose life you might change with a single video. The books that have shaped my journey and that I personally recommend are all linked in the description below. Go check them out. They are worth every page. And don't forget, there is a free PDF in the description on how to interpret angel numbers and equal hours. Grab yours, it is completely free, and it might just change the way you see the signs the universe has been sending you all along. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.